The Nashville Predators situation is beyond confusing, as just weeks after reports came out the team was likely looking to go towards a rebuild, new reports have surfaced saying that Nashville's looking for some top forward and defenseman talent. This is confusing, but not only that, the lines, the players that they brought in the offseason have gone from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows now in Nashville, with some people bouncing back. The system that coach Andrew Brunette has been running has run into some big problems that were not necessarily there last year. There is crazy stuff going on left, right, and center. We're going to break all that down, but most importantly, the new trade reports coming up on this episode of Hat-Trick HQ. So stick around. But before we get into the video, guys, just want to remind you that there's a lot of you, 90+% of you watching this video have not hit the subscribe button yet. It's completely free down below, and if you hit it, you'll get kept up to date on all things NHL, as we have daily, sometimes even multiple daily uploads. So I promise it'll be worth it. Help us on our goal of hitting 7,500. We'd really appreciate it. Mark, Darius, there's a lot of interesting stuff to get into on this front right now, but the biggest thing is the recent trade reports coming out of Nashville. As according to Elliotte Friedman on Saturday, he said everyone knows that Nashville are looking for a center. They're also looking at their blue line, as Alex Doherty says. Friedman making it sound like the Predators are buyers, which would be something else. And this goes completely against pretty much every rumor we have been hearing, every report we've been hearing over the past few weeks. Mark, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the idea that Nashville could be buyers? I know they have the roster to likely do it, signing a bunch of big-name free agents, a lot of guys who are right there in their prime right now, but it's just kind of crazy how this season has been an absolute roller coaster so far.
I mean, seeing Trotz just a few weeks ago say, hey, we're looking at a possible rebuild was a little wild to look at with this roster. I mean, looking at the current standings as we're recording this, the Nashville Predators are 6-10-3, which is just 2 points better than a rebuilding team in the Chicago Blackhawks. We've seen this Nashville team go out, spend the cap, pick up a bunch of names. I mean, half of this lineup looks like a new roster. You picked up guys like Marchessault, picked up guys like Steven Stamkos. None of it really seems to be working right now, but overall, I think they need to do something. This is a team that actually did give the Vancouver Canucks quite a headache last year in the playoffs. We've seen them, like I said, they went out, they picked up a lot of names, they spent quite a bit of money in free agency. Brady Shea's the guy they picked up Scott Wedgwood. We've seen them go get Steven Stamkos, they signed Saros to an extension, they picked up Marchessault. This is moves from a team that wants to contend, not from a team that wants to go into a rebuild. Darius, looking at this, do you think the real picture is they really need to go out and actually pick up some pieces, like a new center, like a top four defenseman?
Yeah, this has been the most inconsistent team for me in the NHL, not just their play, but the messaging from management as well, right? Like earlier in the season, we hear, okay, we're going to start a rebuild now because we're not playing great. And that is just absurd to think about because of all the pieces that they picked up in the offseason, all the money that they spent. And then now it looks like, okay, we're going to add, right? And I think it's closer to that. I think it's closer to we're going to add. And yes, they need another center. They went out and got a lot of really skilled wingers, but they have no centerman to feed them the puck. Obviously, Ryan O'Reilly is playing up there on the first line. I mean, the first line really hasn't changed from last season, but you've added a lot of skill on the wings otherwise in free agency this year. And Colton Sissons is an okay centerman, right? Maybe a third line centerman. And I mean, if you give Tommy Novak a shot there on the second line as well, I think that maybe he can make something happen. With Steven Stamkos, he had a pretty good year last year as well, but I think you need more center help. And I'm not saying it has to be a bona fide number one centerman, but maybe a nice second line center there that can do something with Stamkos as well and get those guys going, because 5-on-5 hasn't been great so far this season. If you look at the plus minus, it's not great. And I know that doesn't tell a whole story, and I like to look too much into plus minus, but it does tell a little bit of a story. And we'll get the defense in a second, but I think that they need to add at the center position for sure.
I think that's one of the biggest things. And it's one of the biggest complaints I've actually seen from Predators fans, right? Like Ryan O'Reilly's great. And I think in a lot of games, he could still serve that 1C role. But the problem right now is that it's kind of center depth. And Tommy Novak's a solid third line center. Dude's coming off, I think, a 43 and then a 45-point season the past couple of years. But when you have guys like Stamkos and Marchessault who just can't seem to get things going 5-on-5, sure, Stamkos had a couple power play goals in his last game. We saw one of them in that intro video, right? Like, that's good, but you still need guys, like you said, Darius, who can consistently feed guys like Stamkos and Marchessault the puck. And, you got a guy like Evangelista who's solid. You got a guy like Nyquist on that top line who's coming off a, career year. But when it gets down to it, they're just not clicking. It's a lot of players who kind of came in, they're filling certain roles, but they're not working together as a cohesive unit. And I've seen a lot of Predators fans put some of that on Andrew Brunette. Now, we did see this big, streak last season where they played very, very, very well. But this season is just another one of these times where it seems like Predators fans are kind of sick of saying, well, just like they got to figure it out. It's a bunch of new faces. And while there is some credence to that, right now, like at what point do you just say, okay, this is not working? Do you fire the coach? Fans seem split on that. Do you just mix up the lines constantly? Do you make a big splash of a trade to try and get someone with Stamkos on the wing and Marchessault on the other wing, maybe someone who can fill that 1C or 2C role? It's tough to say, but right now, like, I don't know. Like, I'm not even sure making a big trade for a big name player, first of all, if it's even going to be possible. Second, if it's going to change that much, if the guys really can't work together now. Mark, do you really think there's maybe one guy out there who can be that kind of glue piece for them?
I mean, looking at the market, there is a lot of teams selling. The Pittsburgh Penguins, a team that's everyone's available from Kyle Dubas, except for Sidney Crosby. So maybe you go and pick up a center, but I like to look at the trade the Colorado Avalanche made last year to pick up Casey Middlestat, moving out Bowen Byram. There's no one on this back end that kind of seems like a Bowen Byram that you can trade to a team looking to move on from a young center that can play in the middle six or in the top six. So it's going to get interesting. I mean, they do have cap space. They have almost 25 million going into deadline. So they have the room to work it. But it seems like Barry Trotz wanting to go out, adding a center, but also a defenseman. With term, it's going to be hard to do, especially if they don't want to touch too much of the roster. I mean, you have so many new faces. You don't want to go out and say, hey, we're going to go and trade maybe one of our new pickups like Steven Stamkos or Marchessault, Brady Shea. These guys you don't want to move out as you just signed them. So, Darius, looking at this, do you think there's someone on this roster that maybe they'll move out to pick up someone else? Or do you think they're going to kind of look at more draft capital and young pieces to bring someone in?
Well, I think they need another piece for sure. And I don't know if it's necessarily a younger piece, but they need another piece, whether it be a center or even defense. And I'll get into that in a second too. But they need to add more pieces. But at the end of the day, in terms of the team overall, like this is a team that I think is going to figure it out. And I don't think they're, making a big splash is going to make that much of a difference. We saw it last year. It was the same roster, right? That turned it around after obviously the whole debacle with the concert and missing the concert. So it was the same team. They ended up making the playoffs. So I think ultimately they will make the playoffs. But again, if you look at the defense, I don't think that the top four is good enough. And they spent a lot of money on a lot of players, offense, defense this past offseason as well. And, Brady Shea has not been playing great. Makes a lot of money, right? And I think if you look at the top four, no disrespect to Jeremy Lozon, but he's not a top four defenseman. He doesn't really bring a lot to the table besides his physicality. So I think that they're going to have to add another player there. And again, it's going to be tricky with the cap situation, not just the Nashville Predators cap situation. They have money that they can play with. It's other teams, what works for other teams, right? So it's going to be interesting heading into the trade deadline. But ultimately, I think this is a team that should add. I don't know if it's necessarily a big fish, but they're going to need like one or two more pieces to really make a run. They added a lot of really good skilled players this offseason and spent a lot of money. You might as well go out and get another piece or two to really put them over the top.
I got one thing I want to bring up before we end this up. Then we can talk about the goaltending. We could talk about the whole Askarov trade and how that maybe impacted how Predators fans and management look at the future. Like that to me actually symbolizes a very interesting shift in perspective for the team. But I think we'll leave that because I think there's been a lot of Askarov trade talk. But I want to talk about other prospects because let's be honest, when we look at who Nashville has been able to develop into true, like solid guys in the roster, like solid, maybe top six forwards or top four defensemen, the players are fairly few and far between. And from what I gather, a lot of Predators fans have seemed to be a bit fed up with the team's ability to develop this young talent. The system down in Milwaukee has not really worked out the way they've wanted. So while, yes, you can trade for these players, wouldn't it be so much better if they could bring someone up from within and fill that spot? Who is it right now? I don't know if there really is an answer. And I'd love for some Predators fans to talk down below, but like, Mark, I'll go to you. Actually, I'll bounce it back to you, Darius. We're gonna switch this up a little bit and go back this other way. I know, like we've talked before about certain teams, like maybe the team behind me and maybe one of the teams behind you, not really of going through stretches where they can't really develop those high-level prospects, and they've made trades to try and fill those gaps instead of building up within, and that often leaves you maybe short of where you want to be, or at least shortens your window. So for me, that is actually a pretty big concern for the Predators. We'll see what fans have to say, but honestly, like, if they really just want to patch this hole with just trades, I'm not personally sold that that'll make them a perennial contender.
Now, while I do think that Nashville will figure it out with this group of players and they will eventually make the playoffs, I do think that they're falling victim to that a little bit. Like you said, it's a great point. And I mean, I have two jerseys behind me, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the New York Rangers, who the Toronto Maple Leafs, at least in the mid 2000s, and the New York Rangers of recent years, can't develop young players and they keep trading for help, like Artemi Panarin, right? And guys like this in the mid 2000s Leafs who are trading for Brian Leetch. They never developed young players. They were always going out to get the biggest, names out there, even if they were older. So I feel like Nashville might be falling victim to that a little bit, because if there is an injury, who do you call up at this point, right? There is a little bit of a gap there. So that is something interesting to keep an eye on. But at the end of the day, personally, I think that this is a team that will figure it out, and there may be one or two pieces away from making a splash in the playoffs. I do think they'll get to the playoffs, but making a splash in the playoffs, they still need a piece or two. Mark, I don't know how you feel about that.
See, the biggest thing is I don't think they should go out and pick up a couple other 30-year-olds to add to this roster. I think an interesting aspect would be to go out and maybe pick up a couple of young guys on the fringe of breaking into the NHL. These are guys they can add in. I mean, seeing Barry Trotz, he's not afraid to make moves. This almost looks like my fantasy team when I'm playing NHL. You're looking at this. They're going out, they're picking up faces. Nashville wants to turn into a contender. They want to turn into a destination for a lot of these guys. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly signed with the team after being with the Toronto Maple Leafs, saying Nashville is where he wanted to go. This is a team that people might start looking at if they can continue to tend. So I think it's an interesting spot to be in. But if the team continues to struggle, if this team stays down in the bottom of the Central in the NHL or even just in the West, I think Barry Trotz is going to have a tough decision to make.
It's going to be really interesting to follow. I think I'm a little more hesitant on this team than you guys. While I do agree they have a great team, the depth does scare me. Though, to be fair, even those like physical aspects, like you mentioned, that second pairing with a guy like Lozon, that stuff plays a lot better if you get to the playoffs than it does in the regular season. But hey, they still have a whole regular season ahead of them. So we'll see what happens. But I think moves are coming, and we'd love to hear what you guys have to say about the Predators down below. Let us know what you think about these trade rumors. Do you think the Predators will bounce back, or are you maybe more hesitant? Maybe think they might not get over that hump. We'd love to hear from you. But that'll do it for this episode of Hat Trick HQ. If you could leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel, again, completely free. We got daily NHL content all season long, so hit the button if you enjoyed what you saw here today. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Mark and Darius. We'll catch you in the next one.